Well, let's welcome in Rich Lowry, the aforementioned editor of National Review and New York Times best-selling author and author of Lincoln Unbound. Hello, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I was very afraid. I don't know if you were listening. We didn't have your number, so we had to go find it. And I just told the whole story on the air. And anyway, long story short, I've already given a little rundown of the book and what. Okay, so explain to me, if you can, Richard. And congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
It's a great book, and I've heard great things, great reviews, and I know it's doing very well. How on earth did Barack? Well, maybe it's a bad question. I guess I know the answer, but maybe this is a better way to phrase it. We should have been forewarned when Barack Obama compared himself to Abraham Lincoln in any way, shape, or form. We should have known what was coming for the next 4, now 8 years.
Yeah, not any grandiosity there or anything, right?
And no comparison whatsoever in any way, in any aspect of their beliefs, of their way of governing, or anything really.
Yeah. Well, Illinois, they have that in common. Lawyers, they have that in common.
Okay.
And in fairness to Obama, he does point out that Lincoln supported subsidies for the railroads and for the canals and whatnot, and then tries to spin that into Lincoln sort of blessing the entirety of the government we have now. Whereas if we just did infrastructure, which everyone at some level supports, we all like bridges, depending on as long as there's a bridge to somewhere and it makes economic sense, we would have basically no federal government whatsoever, right?
Right.
The federal spending would be 0.5% of GDP or something. So Lincoln, he did support the canals and the railroads, but he did it for a very important reason, which is you couldn't have any functioning market in America without them. With the world that he grew up in, there was no good way to get goods to market. If you can't get goods to market, you can't have a market. And there also wasn't, financial markets to speak of. There weren't angel investors. There weren't big industrialists. So if you wanted to do these kind of big projects, there needed to be some element of government support. Today we have a different situation. If you actually have a wind farm that makes sense, someone will invest in it. And President Obama's green energy agenda doesn't have to do anything about developing the potential of the country. It has something to do with suppressing the best sources of energy in favor of a fashionable lark in the form of green energy. So I think it's a distortion of what Lincoln was about, which ultimately came down to individual striving, individual responsibility. He hated the idea of class warfare. He revered the founders.
Yeah, absolutely. The total antithesis in all the areas you mentioned when you compare it to Barack Obama. I was joking earlier when you say how an ambitious young Railsplitter saved the American dream and how we can do it again. And I'm wondering if it's going to take an ambitious young Railsplitter to save us.
Yeah, I don't know how many rail splitters we have anymore, Steve. That's part of Lincoln's success, because we think of him as the rail splitter, and that's in the subtitle of my book, but he hated splitting rails, and that's why he wanted to create a new kind of country. And the anecdote that really gets to this, if you'd indulge me just 30 seconds,
sure.
He had a rowboat as a kid, a young man, on the shores of the Ohio River, and two gentlemen drive up with their luggage, and they want to meet a steamboat out in the middle of the river, and they say, "Hey, kid, will you row us out?" He rows them out, helps them with their luggage. They get on the steamboat. They're about to steam away. He says, "Wait a minute, you didn't pay me." And they said, "Okay." And to his shock, they both threw silver $50 down in the bottom of his boat. And in the White House, decades later, this obviously made a big impression on him. He says, "I realized at that moment I had earned my first dollar. I was a more optimistic and hopeful being from that time." So he wanted to create a country where people could earn a dollar and where they had to earn a dollar. Because if you read the letters he wrote to his stepbrother, who kind of lived back on the farm in a subsistence agricultural existence, they're excoriating when a stepbrother asked him for money. And he said, "Look, you are destitute because you idle away all your time. Go to work is the only cure for your cause." So Lincoln believed in this fundamental dignity of labor and the fundamental principle that you get to keep the proceeds of your own labor.
Right, the rewards of labor, being rewarded for working hard. And again, as you point out, that's something that is not the case right now.
Yeah, and this was the best people in the mid-19th century. This is the sensibility. I wrote a 4th of July column about Frederick Douglass, and it's so funny because there's a famous letter from Lincoln to an aspiring law student who asked him, "How do you become a lawyer?" Lincoln says, "Work, work, work is the main thing." And there's Frederick's wonderful Frederick Douglass lecture called "Self-Made Men," where he says, "Work, work, work, work. So he beats Lincoln. There's one more work. There's 4 works. But he says, how that's the way ahead.
And he must have been tweeting them in capitals because they were louder also.
Yeah, they are reproduced in capital letters with like 3 or 4 exclamation points.
There you go.
But this was just the key ethic. And Lincoln talked about striving, and he said the problem with slavery, it takes away from the African American the right to strive to be a man. So it's an effort. It's in making the most of ourselves that we become men and women. And that's an ethic that's really counter to the spirit of contemporary progressivism.
Only a couple of minutes left, Rich, unfortunately. And tell me the greatest misconception about Lincoln that we have that you found is not true.
Well, one thing that surprises people, he didn't like the nickname Abe. And this goes to, we have this conception of him as this common man, this tribune of common sense. He wanted to be respectable his whole life. He had a formidable dignity to him. The people who knew him best, his secretaries in the White House, spent so much time with him in the most trying circumstances imaginable, just said there was this line beyond which you couldn't go with Lincoln. Ultimately, he was this private person. So I think people don't get just that dignity, and he's not the kind of guy you go and slap his back, right?
Right.
And he told lots of jokes, but partly the purpose of the joke was kind of and Reagan used humor this way too. It was a tool in a way sometimes to push people away or to tell them no without actually saying no. So he's not a warm and cuddly figure the way you may get from the guy wearing the stovepipe hat, on the President's Day sale at the local.
Right, Honest Abe, yeah. In the commercial. He's not the guy in the commercial. Yeah. Rich, a great read and so much more to it, his education and of course, dealing with the Civil War and slavery and all that. It's all in Lincoln Unbound by Rich Lowry, How an Ambitious Young Railsplitter Saved the American Dream and How We Can Do It Again. I almost said today, but today's not there. Rich Lowry, great luck with the book, sir. We'll speak